A story is told of a little girl having a conversation with one of her Sunday school teachers. It was just after the celebration of Christmas, and this little girl was part of the Christmas pageant that her congregation had put on. She was part of the group that told the story of how the baby Jesus was born to Mary and Joseph in a stable in Bethlehem. Her Sunday school room was filled with Christmas decorations just right for the celebration of Jesus' birth. Mary was there, Joseph was there, and the baby Jesus was there in the manger. Well, the 4-year-old little girl came back sometime after the Christmas celebration was over and found that all of the decorations had been removed from her classroom. And instead of all that had been there before, there was now a picture of a grown-up Jesus standing in the midst of a group of children, and the little girl looked at the picture and asked her teacher, "Who was that man?" Her teacher said, "Well, that's Jesus." And the little girl shook her head and said, "That's Jesus? Boy, he sure grew up fast." For many of us, I think, the historical Jesus evokes a definite image in our minds, don't you think? Some of us see Jesus as a gentle, mild, humble person turning the other cheek in the face of adversity. Some see Jesus in the role of a compassionate healer. Others see him as the good shepherd, gently carrying a lost sheep back to the fold. We can imagine him blessing children or speaking with wisdom to crowds of onlookers. But today's gospel lesson presents a different picture of Jesus for all of us. This Jesus that we see here in the 3rd chapter of Mark's gospel is the Jesus who angrily cleansed the temple, as we read about during the season of Lent. This is the Jesus who said, "If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away, for it's better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell." This is the Jesus who warned against any who cause a little one to sin, saying that it would be better for a millstone to be put around their neck and be thrown into the sea. This is the Jesus who called the scribes and the Pharisees just the way he saw them. This is the Jesus who came to bring a revolution, to change everything that the pious religious leaders truly believed was all that was necessary in order to be good people and faithful people to all that God expected of them. Here in the 3rd chapter of Mark's gospel, Jesus is facing all kinds of opposition, and his earthly ministry is only beginning in Mark's gospel. The series of lessons that are taken from this part of the gospel demonstrate again and again how the Pharisees and the scribes found fault in nearly everything that Jesus was doing and saying. The energy and enthusiasm with which he carried out his ministry was at an all-time high. He'd just gone through the process of calling his disciples, and now those disciples were going to learn just what it was that they were called to and for. Here in Mark's gospel, Jesus is one of the most typical kind of scenarios. Here he is again caught in the midst of a crowd which was so full of people who had all kinds of ideas, maybe misconceptions and misperceptions about who this man truly was. And there were 3 different groups of people in the midst of this crowd. 2 of those 3 groups should have been friendly and on the side of Christ, but the reality is that 2 of those groups were not able to recognize the true glory of all that Jesus was about. The first of those groups, one that's most surprising on the basis in which they behaved, was Jesus' family. The concern about who Jesus was and what he stood for was already strong here at the early point in his ministry. The things that he was saying and doing gave everyone the impression that he was crazy, that he'd gone out of his mind, according to Mark. Nothing that Jesus stood for was familiar to those who were gathered around him. Everyone was sure that he had to be possessed somehow, that he was off his rocker, that something other than the real love and power of God was his motivation. His family was genuinely concerned about him, his safety and his stability. They went out from the place where they had been eating and trying to convince Jesus to come inside, to get away from the crowd where the situation might be a little bit better and Jesus' life might be a little bit more protected. His mothers and brothers wanted only that, to protect Jesus, but Jesus made it clear that the people who understood the things that he was about, the people who were willing to be just a little bit different than the rest of the society around them, the people who were willing to take a risk and stand up for the things that were most important in the kingdom of God, those people were the real mothers and brothers and sisters of Jesus Christ. This first group of people gathered in the crowd with Jesus was his family, and they responded to him and his deeds with embarrassment because of all that Jesus' enemies were saying about him. Jesus teaches in this lesson even his beloved family what the goals and the purposes of God and his kingdom truly are. And in the process, he extends the boundaries of family to include all those who were willing to do and say the things that he was doing and saying. Hopefully, that family boundary extends far enough to include even me and all of you as well. There was a second, more predictable group of people in that crowd with Jesus as well, and they were the scribes who had been sent to the place where Jesus was from Jerusalem. They had been sent to see what this new evangelist or itinerant preacher was all about. They were the ones who stood back in the crowd and sneered as Jesus did what he did, and they were certain that he was filled with some kind of unclean spirit. And further certain that it was that kind of evil motivation that empowered Jesus to do the radically new things that were taking place in front of this curious crowd of onlookers. Jesus responds to this group of unbelievers by asking them how it could be possible that it was Satan who was acting in the midst of what Jesus said and did. He asks, how can Satan cast out Satan? And then he offers a number of parables that demonstrate that it would be clearly impossible for Satan to work against himself. He says it's like a house that is divided against itself. That house can never stand. Or like a kingdom divided against itself, it too could never stand. Jesus indicates that he's come like a thief into a strong man's home and is in the business of plundering his property. Clearly, the power of Satan is strong and real, but Jesus confronts that power head on and makes it clear that such evil will never last. The third group involved in this lesson is the group that is obviously near and dear to the heart of Christ. It's the group made up of his disciples. It's those who sit with him and begin to develop an understanding of what Jesus came to be about. It's this group, Jesus says, who are truly his mother and his brothers and his sisters. It's this group, Jesus says, who are able to understand his purpose, at least in part. They have understood the struggle to understand the kingdom, and now they're involved in the process of seeing to it that the kingdom is brought to completion. That group of people, his disciples, and all others who share his vision are truly Jesus' family. In a book that was written a long time ago entitled Rough Justice, there is a story that is told about a little boy named Braun. Braun was brought to church for the first time in his life, taken to a church where his uncle was the vicar. And for the boy, it was an intriguing experience. He was impressed with the atmosphere in this building. He liked listening to the choir sing and to the organ being played. His uncle stepped into the pulpit and began to preach, and the boy listened intently. And he heard the strange story of a man who was the holiest and kindest and most wonderful man who ever lived. Sick people sought this man out and were made well again. People with great sadness found happiness in this man again. Some whose lives had been all wrong were forgiven and taught how to forgive others as well. People afraid of dying were promised that they could live forever. This wonderful person, Jesus, touched many lives. But the sermon went on. Not everyone approved of Jesus. Some people hated him and wanted to get rid of him. They arrested him, put him on trial, took him with two common criminals and killed him on a cruel thing called a cross. The uncle went on to say that this man was not dead, though, but lived again, and now he was looking for people to go out and do for the world all that he had done. Well, as the service ended that day, worshipers left their pews and went out the aisles, and those who came to church with Braun left with all of the others. But when they got outside, they realized that the boy was not with them. Braun was thoroughly moved by the story of this man Jesus, and he simply could not understand why people around him were so calm about this remarkable happening. They walked out of church as though nothing unusual had been told to them. Braun was still in the pew, sobbing. His friends found him and said, "Braun, you mustn't take this so seriously, so much to heart. People might think you're weird." Is it possible that we are among those who hear the greatest news in the world and walk out of the church unmoved? Is it possible that we can listen to that incredible, true story and leave this place with no more emotion than if we had just paid the electric bill? When you stop and truly consider all that we do and all that we've done for years in the life of the church, is it possible that we really don't take that remarkable message to heart anymore? Because we are faithful people and make it a habit to gather as people of God in places like this, it may be possible that we've gotten used to this story, this crazy, true story, and hardly think about it anymore. Perhaps we figured out how not to take it too seriously, because if we do, people might think we're just a little bit weird. Mark tells us that Jesus' family was embarrassed. His enemies were enraged. But a small group of loyal people who were willing to endure the ridicule, the sarcasm of others, the risk of getting involved, even to the point of facing their own death, Jesus called them and us his family. I encourage us this week to think about how we might live our lives in such a way that the goals and purposes of the kingdom of God are our top priority. How might we live our lives in such a way that Jesus would turn to us and say, "Here are my mothers and brothers and sisters." That's our call. Give thanks today that Jesus does indeed call us brothers and sisters, and in calling us enables us to be all that God created us to be, to the glory of God.